Hello, good evening and welcome to The Take with Sophy Ridge, live at 9 here in the heart of Westminster. Now, the first flights carrying British nationals evacuated from Sudan have landed in the UK, but there are thousands more people waiting to escape. And the situation in Sudan raises questions about how to deal with people fleeing danger around the world, just as the government's illegal migration bill designed to stop small boats crossing the Channel passes in the House of Commons. A government minister tonight tells this programme it's testing the limits of international law. So plenty to get stuck into as we bring you takes from all sides over the next 60 minutes.
The ayes to the right, 289. The noes to the left, 230.
Well, that was the government's illegal migration legislation passing its final Commons hurdle this evening. And earlier on, things got pretty heated and actually quite personal as the two major party leaders clashed at PMQs.
If he has any actual ideas for the economy, he should say so, because all I hear from the party opposite, it's more spending, more borrowing, higher inflation, higher interest rates. It's the same old Labour Party.
And there wasn't much quarter given by Keir Starmer either.
This is Mr. 24 tax rises. And I've never heard anything so out of touch as the answer that he has just given. He could stop the handouts he's giving to oil and gas giants. He could scrap his beloved non-dom status.
I think you can really tell that there might be the local elections around the corner from that exchange, don't you think? We've got some top guests on the programme this evening as well, including the Minister for Africa, Andrew Mitchell. For the Labour Party, we're going to be talking to Labour's Shadow International Trade Secretary, Nick Thomas-Symonds. Plus, we'll be talking to the Conservative MP who won concessions from the government on that illegal migration bill. That is Tim Loughton. He'll be on the programme as well. Plus, much more besides on The Take. Now, the government's illegal migration bill, all part of Rishi Sunak's pledge to stop the boats, has passed the Commons and is on the way to the Lords. But there was some dissent from the likes of Theresa May, Ian Duncan-Smith and Geoffrey Cox on the Conservative benches. Well, let's crack straight on. We can start with the best bits of the week so far.
Hello, good morning. The UK government has announced that an operation is underway for evacuation flights for British nationals stuck in Sudan.
The first one was sort of the middle of the evening yesterday. There was one in the early hours of this morning.
And essentially asked people if they feel comfortable to make their own way to the airfield. We don't really have any other way to get them there ourselves.
I'm encouraged that both factions have called a 72-hour ceasefire, though, of course, we cannot be sure for how long it will hold.
You just think to yourself, should I have left? Should I have stayed behind? It just angers me so much that beautiful Sudan, with its beautiful people, is being governed by boys with very dangerous toys.
Now, the government's illegal immigration bill returns to Parliament today, with MPs expected to vote on amendments to the bill this evening.
We need to deter people from making the journey in the first place. That's why I encourage everybody to get behind our measures.
The United Kingdom, like many countries, works closely with the UNHCR, and we already operate safe and legal routes in partnership with them.
Last couple of minutes, Theresa May, who has an amendment down to protect victims of modern slavery from this bill, has made a very angry speech.
Government Amendment 95 is an example of good faith. I would say rather it's a slap in the face of those of us who actually care about the victims of modern slavery and human trafficking.
The Prime Minister is on his feet.
He talks about this non-dom thing. I think he's already spent the money that he claims he'd raised on 5 different things.
This is Mr. 24 tax rises. And I've never heard anything so out of touch. Does he really think that everything's fine? Or is he just clueless about life outside of his bubble?
A really lively day in the House of Commons, as you could see from that. And we can start this evening with the government's response to that crisis in Sudan and the news that evacuated Brits have started arriving in the UK. A little earlier, I spoke to the Development and Africa Minister, Andrew Mitchell, at the Foreign Office. Thank you very much for being on the programme. What's the latest update you can give us on the evacuation of British nationals from Sudan?
Well, so far so good. It's going very smoothly. We've had about 300 out today, 4 flights. There's no logjam at the airport. The message to the British nationals who want to leave is come to the airport. There's no great backlog, no great congestion, and we're taking people out in a steady manner. And we want them all to come if they want to leave. And as you know, we are urging them to do so. If they are eligible, they should come as soon as they can.
You say it's gone smoothly. Some people are saying they've been stranded. There's been others saying there's been anarchy, there's been violence, that there should have been escorts to help people get to the airport safely. How can you say it's gone smoothly?
Well, I mean, in terms of getting to the airport, we adopted exactly the same route as the Germans did. The Germans told people they needed to get themselves to the airport and then they would be taken out, and we've done exactly the same thing. And people have been coming to the airport, and as I say, 300 today. There's a small queue, but not a large queue. The border force are processing people. It's all going relatively smoothly. I mean, of course there are problems, and in these sort of situations, the news isn't always accurate. But what I can tell you for certain tonight is that about 300 people have already come out. Will be more, I think, by the end of the day, and 4 flights have left.
You say that people should continue to come to the airport. Are you prepared to stay until everyone who wants to get there has managed to reach it?
We are absolutely in the hands of the ceasefire. So far, more or less, this ceasefire has held. This is the second day of a 3-day ceasefire. We are doing everything we can to make sure it's prolonged, and on the wider stage too, trying to negotiate for a longer ceasefire, because if the combatants don't lay down their arms and return to barracks, there is going to be a humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan. But as far as the British citizens are concerned, we are getting them out. There's a steady flow. If you want to go, please come to the airport.
Did you do any reviews after the evacuation in Afghanistan? Did you learn any lessons from that?
We learnt an enormous number of lessons from that, and those lessons have been implemented.
Like what kind of thing?
Well, the crisis centre that is working seamlessly across government, 24/7 since the crisis broke, processing, dealing with everything. We are following every single conceivable opportunity. But remember that Afghanistan was very different, and in some ways this is worse than that, because we don't have troops on the ground, we don't control the airport like we did in Afghanistan, and we don't have a permissive environment. Khartoum Airport is not working. No planes can land or take off. And of course there's not a permissive environment. We had the permission of the Taliban to leave from Kabul. This is a ceasefire, and it can break down.
Yeah, we're talking about the British nationals who can leave. Of course, in Sudan, there's many other people who can't leave, right, because they live there. What are we doing to help them?
Well, there's 16 million people already who are on humanitarian relief, help with food and also with other humanitarian support. That was before this crisis started. And as a result of this crisis, the humanitarian agencies have had to take their people out. 5 humanitarian workers have died. And so the situation is even worse. It's not just that there's a greater humanitarian crisis, it's that the humanitarian community are not there to help them. So that is why having a ceasefire is absolutely essential.
Now, we know you are someone who believes in international aid. You believe in helping the poorest people in the world, the most vulnerable people in the world, because obviously it's the right thing to do to help them, but also, I guess, there's a soft power there. You can intervene earlier to try and mean that you can shape the situation, if you like. Aid to Sudan halved recently, 142 million in 2020 to 2021 to 62 million in 21 to 22. These things have consequences, don't they?
Well, if you look at the position, over recent years we've spent something like £250 million there in relief, but you're looking at the bilateral figures. We help in a whole range of different ways through the United Nations, through the various agencies.
I'm just looking at the Foreign Office figures here, aren't I?
Yes,
what other figures am I supposed to look at?
They are the bilateral figures.
Yes, they are. They're aid from the UK to Sudan.
Yes, but remember, we support the people of Sudan through humanitarian relief, not only bilaterally, but also through UN agencies. So the picture is not quite as those figures would suggest, because there's other support that we give. But remember that when there is a humanitarian crisis, we have a degree of flexibility, as we've shown in the Horn of Africa, for example, so that we can do more.
And but I guess my point is, if you intervene earlier with aid, I mean, you believe this too, right? You believe this. If you intervene early with aid, people argue that you don't have to have the same full-blown humanitarian crises?
Well, the humanitarian crises that occur, they can be mitigated in some ways by the sort of climate change adaptation money that we spend, which means that the next time the same sort of crisis strikes, then there is greater resilience. But remember, this did not start as a humanitarian crisis. It started because two generals were slugging it out for control. There's no ideology involved here, and there's no weather conditions involved here. It has broken down because of the behaviour of these two generals. But the point I'm making is this, that on a humanitarian crisis, we do have a degree of flexibility, and we exercise that as crises arrive.
OK. What are the safe and legal routes for someone in Sudan to claim asylum in the UK?
Well, at the moment, those safe and legal routes don't exist. But the Prime Minister, in the changes that we are making as part of the legislation which is going through the House tonight, has said that we will be seeking to set up safe and legal routes. There's a package in order to stop the awful cross-channel trade that is being perpetrated by the people smugglers. There's a package there, and it includes developing safe and legal routes. It includes a massive improvement in the relationship with the French, and it improves much quicker processing in the UK. So the Prime Minister's package, which we're legislating for tonight, is, I think, the right package to deter people from putting themselves into the hands of the modern-day equivalent of the slave trader and a leaky boat and crossing the channel.
So safe and legal routes to Sudan will happen?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the government has made it clear that it will be trying to implement, as a result of this whole package, all the measures we're taking, that we will be looking to try and make sure that safe and legal routes are set up.
I mean, we have no timescale for this. We don't know what countries they're going to affect. We have no details on it. Are you happy with that? What's going on?
I think it's important to get it right. There's a longer-term plan which the Prime Minister has brought in when he looked at the whole issue of the boats crossing the Channel and migration. But to your earlier point, I would just point out that the development budget, international development spending, which, as you say, I do believe strongly in, and so do millions of people in Britain, it is designed to try and build safer, more prosperous societies and countries over there, so that people don't feel the need to move to the richer world.
As you say, you've been voting on the illegal migration bill about trying to stop small boats, about sending people to Rwanda if they do make that crossing. Now, the Home Secretary says she can't say whether it's compatible with the Convention on Human Rights, but she wants MPs to vote for it anyway. I just want to read out to you what Sir Geoffrey Cox, the Conservative MP, said. He said the government is, in fact, asking this House to give legislative sanction to at least the possibility that a Minister of the Crown will deliberately disobey the international law obligations of this country. What would you say to your colleague?
Well, I think that we are testing the limits of the convention. And we're not the first government to do so. Labour did it as well on one occasion. We're testing the limits, and we must see what happens as a result of that testing.
So you're testing the limits of international law?
We are, yes, we are, and the government's been quite open about that, because the law as it operates at the moment, and in particular the conventions, the migration conventions, are quite dated. I think they do need to be updated, but it's a very difficult thing to do because you have to have agreement across all countries. So I do think they are needing to be tested, and that's what the government will be doing.
Sir Geoffrey Cox says MPs are being asked to approve quite consciously and deliberately a deliberate breach of our obligations under the ECHR. You're lawmakers. He says you're breaching the law. You say you're testing the limits of the law.
Well, if you look at the response from Robert Jenrick at the dispatch box, he wouldn't accept that. But
would you accept that?
What I'm saying to you is that we know that we are testing the frontiers of the law here. We've been quite open about that, as the government properly should be. It is because circumstances are so changed since these laws were first brought in.
I mean, testing the frontiers of the...
Let's see where it lands.
Testing the frontiers of the law sounds like you're doing some great, big, grand gesture, like sort of space exploration or something, when actually other people would say, look, let's call a spade, you're breaching the law.
What Sir Geoffrey Cox is a very eminent lawyer and former minister. Robert Jenrick is also a very eminent lawyer, and he does not agree with Sir Geoffrey's analysis. So I can't give you an answer on that legal argument tonight, but I can tell you that the reason the government is doing this is to try and resolve an intolerable situation where people are putting themselves in leaky boats, trying to cross one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. It's extremely dangerous and it's wrong, and we're trying to stop it.
OK, thank you very much. testing the frontiers of international law, according to the Development and Africa Minister Andrew Mitchell. I'm sure this won't be the end of that story if the courts have anything to do with it as well. There'll be more on the crisis on Sudan and also the evacuation of Britons from the country throughout the evening here on Sky News and in some of the interviews we're doing later as well. But I just want to talk to you about politics in the UK, because it's just 8 days until the set of local elections across England that are a really crucial test for both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. So we can take a bit of a closer look now with our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, about these elections. I have to say, I mean, I'm a bit geeky when it comes to politics, but I'm really excited about these elections. I feel like it is a really big test for Rishi Sunak, of course, but also Keir Starmer. You know, can he convert the big poll lead into results at the ballot box? What are you going to be looking out for?
Absolutely, Sophie. I think, and I'm biased, that you should be excited because a week tomorrow, large parts of the country go to the polls for the last time in local elections before a general election, which is probably going to be next year. I think it matters for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is the first electoral test for Rishi Sunak since he became Prime Minister. And also, everybody's looking to see whether Keir Starmer has the momentum that he's can translate the momentum that he's had in the last year into the ballot box. So let's look first of all at where there are elections, because that's actually pretty critical. Now, 8,100 seats and 230 different councils. But the first thing you'll notice is that this map of the United Kingdom is all chopped up because there are no elections in Scotland, there are no elections in Wales, there aren't elections in Northern Ireland now, but they will be on May the 18th. That's because they didn't think they could get all the counting out of the way before the coronation. And some parts of the country, like London, no elections as well. So you see the kind of broad scope, all different types of councils up for election, metropolitans, borough councils. So a real mix and a real test of different type of politics up and down the country. Now, when counting begins at 10 o'clock on Thursday night, there are all sorts of different ways that you can measure how the parties have done. And we're looking very carefully at all sorts of them. Now, some politicians, often the ones that are doing less well, will tell you there is no relationship between local elections and a general election. There's some evidence you can point to, but just look at this. What this is it's the overall number of councillors that there are in all the different local elections there are going back to 1990. And look at this. Just before the 1997 Labour landslide, what you could see is that Labour did win the highest number of councillors, with the Tories dropping right back down. Then just before David Cameron went into Downing Street, there the Tories had taken over control of local government, really, with Labour in the doldrums. And you can see that line punishment for the Lib Dems of going into coalition. And this is where this is where we left off last year, with the Conservatives just ahead of the Labour Party. So the moment you look at this, you can see one very clear possible outcome, which is if Labour are doing well, maybe these lines will cross and Labour will become the largest party of local government. That's one of the things that we're going to look at. Now, let's look at the seats position at the moment as left last year. The Conservatives have 3,365 seats. Labour have 2,131. Lib Dems 1,223. Now, everybody who watches Sky will know Michael Thrasher. He's our election analyst, a great voice. We rely on his work. Now, he says that in a bad night for the Conservatives, it's entirely possible, it's a little bit higher than my finger, that the Conservatives lose 1,000 seats. It's a big, big number. Now, funnily enough, sitting in front of you, Conservatives agree with that. Greg Hands was saying as much on Sunday. Now, Labour, if they are performing as well in the polls, could put on 700 seats. But funnily enough, you won't get a Labour spokesman to say any of that. So you can kind of see this kind of ballpark of what would be a bad and a good night for both parties. But at the moment, what you have with councils is some are controlled by one party and some are in no overall control. But the party with the largest number of councils up for grabs in overall control is the Conservatives. Now, look at this. Look at how easy it'll seem for the Conservatives doing badly. Because in all of these seats, if the Conservatives lose just one seat on the council, they go. Canterbury, Cherwell, Mason, Theresa May's backyard, Stratford-upon-Avon. They lose 2 seats. All of these go. And, you know, some of these are pretty staunch. That's Brandon Lewis's backyard, Great Yarmouth, Welwyn Hatfield lose 3, and key parts of the Red Wall and the North and the Midlands, Amber Valley, Airwash. You can see going. So it's quite easy for the Conservatives to look like they're having a bad night. But another way that you can look at local elections is by the share of the vote. So at the end of the process, when all the votes have been counted, Michael Thrasher will calculate the percentage that voted for the Conservatives, the percentage that voted for Labour, the percentage that voted for Lib Dems and other. And the question will be, did they do as well as the polls suggest? So at the moment, there's pretty much a 15 percentage point gap, a lead for the Labour Party. Now, the question is it going to be anything like that? Because traditionally in local elections, actually Labour haven't done quite as well. They haven't got quite as high a share of the vote. Last year, Michael Thrasher calculated that the Labour Party got 35 percentage points, quite a bit down on where they are at the moment, and the Tory Party got 33%, which is quite a lot less than they are at the moment. So the question is the Conservative Party, is the Labour Party going to go up from that figure, and can we say that represents success? A quick trot round where we think is important. Now, Labour will tell you that what matters are the seats where they're going to end up fighting in the general election. Places like Swindon, places like Plymouth. Actually, what really matters to Labour is what's going to go on in the north. And we're going to be looking at places like Tees Valley, Stockton, and then in the Midlands, accounts we often talk about with Derby, which the last couple of sets of local elections, Labour did disastrously. Can they get a foothold back? What the Tories say is what they're really worried about is the incursion of the Liberal Democrats in the south. So areas like Surrey Heath, that's Michael Gove, Wokingham, that's John Wedgwood, places like that, they're worried that the Lib Dems are getting a toehold. But what will really worry them is if the gap with the Labour Party extends, and that's what we're going to be looking at. That's how we're going to focus on it. We'll be there from 10:01 on Thursday night, you, me and the Sky team. Watch.
It's going to be, it's going to be really interesting. It's what local elections, there are all these places that you could have never necessarily hear of, that suddenly everyone starts focusing on council areas because it does start to give us a bit of a overall picture on politics. Is Rishi Sunak cutting through? Is he holding on to the blue wall? Is he shoring up the Conservative Party? Is Keir Starmer speaking to the people that he needs to do rather than just piling up votes in areas that Labour are already strong? Sam, you're going to be there. Sam will be there overnight. I'm going to be there the next day trying to work out the narrative. So full coverage of the local elections on Sky News, all our platforms as well, social, online, from election day next Thursday. Definitely one to watch. You're watching The Take. We're live in Westminster. Up next, we are going to be talking to Labour's Shadow International Trade Secretary, Nick Thomas-Symonds.
I hope it makes you happy. I really do. Top person. But you know what? You won't stop me, because I'll just pick it all up and I'll carry on. OK, I can't plant in this section, but I'll carry on. You won't stop me whatsoever.
We've got a fence at the front and there's a footprint. Well, the police said it's a handprint on the actual banner at the front where they've either climbed over or got out. And the salt was just everywhere. It was all over everywhere. 2 days before, I'd been with the children. One was only 5 and one was 7. So to have a 5-year-old sit for an hour and a half planting onions for someone else, that's why it hurt me so much. What happened was we dug it all up and we've moved it over to the front of it. So there's a massive mound, but we're going to get it taken away. It's classed as poisonous, really. You can't do anything with it. But what they didn't think about is all the nature they destroyed as well. I mean, this allotment hadn't been used for 8 years and the worms in it were fat and chunky and we were laughing about how big they are. They're not there anymore. It's mind-blowing. I did all this on nothing. I got from 8-foot brambles to down here with nothing. And now I have this money and I can do so many things to help our community. I just want to make sure that every single penny is used wisely. And we're not just going, oh, we can spend that on that. We can spend that on that. No, it's not going to be like that. We're going to make sure that every penny is used to benefit the community. Mainly root vegetables, because you can make strong, decent meals out of them. Yeah, it's lovely to have lettuce, but it's not going to fill you up. So we need good, strong root vegetables going in. And ones where you can chop and freeze, and that will last through the winter as well. So I'm so looking forward to it.
Hello, welcome back live to Westminster. You are watching The Take. Well, let's get the take from Labour now. Just a little earlier, I spoke to the party's Shadow Trade Secretary, Nick Thomas-Symonds. Let's listen. So Andrew Mitchell has said that the evacuation process from Sudan is going smoothly. Do you think it is?
Well, I sincerely hope that it is. We've got this 72-hour window at the moment with the ceasefire. We really have to have as a priority evacuating British nationals. I understand now that an evacuation centre has been set up. We have to do everything now that we possibly can to make sure that all those British nationals come home, and we make that process as easy for them as possible. But then, more widely, we also have to continue to push through diplomatic channels to try to find an end to this dreadful conflict.
Do you think the government should open up more routes for people to claim asylum from countries like Sudan?
Well, I think, first of all, with Sudan, we've got to work internationally to look at neighbouring countries, because clearly what we want to see is a situation where the conflict is brought to a conclusion and people can return to their homes. And I think that has to be the priority, first of all. Clearly, there will be, as well, Sudanese people here in the United Kingdom, and the government has to look at the situation. There may well be ongoing visa applications, for example, in terms of family members, and the government really does need to be looking at that as well. But the real priority has to be internationally at this time.
Obviously, we'd love to see a diplomatic solution in Sudan, right? I think that goes without saying. But, you know, realistically, how much of a role can the UK actually play in that? Where we can actually do something is take asylum seekers. Should we be doing that?
Well, firstly, the UK still has quite remarkable diplomatic clout around the world, and that is something that I've seen at first hand.
But the question is, should we be taking more asylum seekers from Sudan?
Well, in terms of that, just to take that, firstly, I think it has to be internationally, first of all, that we do this. It has to be an international solution where, of course, we should be playing a part in that. There is a wider question, too, about resettlement schemes. We've run resettlement schemes previously as to how they're working. And, of course, we can look at that. But the priority at the moment has to be internationally.
OK. Obviously, the Sudan situation is happening at a time when you have also been voting on the illegal migration bill. And it does feel like these two issues overlap. We're talking about people in need from overseas. Should we be taking in more asylum seekers?
Well, I think we need to, first of all, deal with the issue that we've got of thousands of people who are risking their lives in small boats in the English Channel. Now, I've been down to Dover, I've been in the past across to France and seen at first hand how dangerous those sea lanes are. Now, to deal with this situation, we need to do, in my view, a number of things. We shouldn't be spending the money that's being spent on the Rwanda scheme, which is just a headline-grabbing scheme. We should be using that money to set up a specific cell in the National Crime Agency to try to deal with people trafficking. Secondly, we need to deal with the asylum backlog. The asylum backlog is in the region of about 138,000. The government just isn't dealing with it. I mean, I've just voted in the House of Commons for fast-track procedures in specific cases, and the government has just voted it down. The asylum system's in chaos. And thirdly, we then need much better return agreements. The government hasn't negotiated a successor scheme to what was called the Dublin III regulation. The Dublin III regulation both allowed us to return people whose claims had failed to other safe countries and also did include a safe route. That's what the government now needs to do.
So I've been listening really carefully to what you've been saying, and it really does strike me that Labour talk a lot about attacking the government when it comes to competence, so getting rid of the backlog of claims, which, don't get me wrong, I can see why that's something that people feel they should be doing. It's hard to disagree with that. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is what Labour under Keir Starmer believes when it comes to asylum seekers. Do you believe that the UK should be taking more asylum seekers?
Well, it will vary, won't it, year on year. And what happens here is people who come here and seek asylum What they actually should have is a process that works very quickly for it to be decided whether they've got a valid claim. And that is a matter, but that is a matter for the courts. I can't sit here, neither can any other politician, and tell you in a particular year how many asylum seekers have valid claims and who don't. That is a matter for the courts.
Sure. Of course, I would never ask you to say which particular people have valid claims or not, but I just think that there is an overall question about what Labour believes when it comes to asylum seekers. Do you think that we're taking enough asylum seekers? And I do think that some politicians would be able to give you an answer to that.
Well, the number that we take will depend upon the number of valid claims that there are each year, and that is a matter for the courts. And in terms of... And let me just answer too, because at the moment we have a situation... Back in the early years of this government, in March 2011, the asylum backlog was probably just under about 6,000. It's now 138,000. Should we be processing those claims far more quickly so that we can see those that have a genuine claim, who've always had a safe haven here, and those who do not have a valid claim that need to be returned to safe countries? Absolutely we should be. That's what I've been trying to vote for in the House of Commons. That's where the government's been failing.
Andrew Mitchell said that the legislation today is, in his words, pushing the limits of international law. Is it breaking international law?
Well, the Home Secretary, in placing a certificate, the so-called Section 19 certificate, under the Human Rights Act on the bill, wasn't able to give a full assurance that it followed international law. And that is and let me just say that is a profound error from this government, because I aspire to negotiate trade deals around the world, and that is important for our prosperity. And to do that, we have to be a country whose word is believed, that when we sign on the dotted line for our international obligations, we are a country that is going to stand by that in the years ahead. And this breaking international law, we've heard it before, of course, when the then Northern Ireland Secretary talks about breaking international law in a limited and specific way. That damages our standing on the international stage and ultimately will damage our prosperity as well.
So just finally, if Labour was in power, would you overturn this legislation?
We will pass legislation that gives effect to the principles that I set out in the interview a moment or two ago, Sophie, so that we can actually have an immigration system that is fair. That's what we will do.
OK, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was the Labour view on the illegal immigration and asylum-seeking situation. Up next on The Take, live in Westminster, of course, we are going to be looking at PMQs. It was a really fiery one, as you'd expect, just a week or so ahead of local elections. Hello, welcome back to Westminster. You're watching The Take. Now, I remember when Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer first started to go up against each other at Prime Minister's Questions, and they were kind of polite. They were almost trying to rise above the fray. Well, that has now completely gone out of the window because there were some pretty personal exchanges over the cost of living, in particular, between the Prime Minister and the Labour leader earlier. Here's our political correspondent Joe Pike with PMQs Unwrapped.
Even before Keir Starmer had asked his first question, Rishi Sunak managed to slip in a dig about Labour's position on gender. It was in response to this.
Given that the Leader of the Opposition apparently doesn't know what a woman is, that he won't stand up to defend women in his own party, voicing views on women's rights, and according to his own front bench, failed to prosecute rapists when he was in charge as DPP, does my right honourable friend think that the Labour Party are in any position to teach anyone about respect for women?
They should work out the answer to one very simple question. I'm certain what a woman is he?
The Labour leader did not take the bait and dodged that topic. Today, Keir Starmer could have asked about the Sudan evacuation or the Dominic Raab bullying row, but instead he focused on the economy and cost of living, with some thinly veiled attacks on the PM, including a riposte to last week being labelled Mr Softy.
This is Mr 24 tax rises. And I've never heard anything so out of touch. Does he really think that everything's fine? Or is he just clueless about life outside of his bubble? He refuses to scrap the non-dom status that benefits him and his family. I can see why he's attracted to this non-dom thing. This Prime Minister is so removed from the country that he boasted that he didn't know a single working-class person.
Those questions from Sir Keir did seem shorter and sharper than usual, but it all got pretty personal. While Starmer painted Sunak as out of touch, Sunak argued Starmer is weak.
He talks about this non-dom thing. I think he's already spent the money that he claims he'd raised on 5 different things. The rank hypocrisy of it. On Monday, in the other place, they decided to side with extremist protesters. Just yesterday, they sided with polluters, Mr. Speaker. We're siding with the British people, Mr. Speaker. That's what the Conservative government does.
Perhaps no surprise we saw that tone of debate with local elections, now just 8 days away. And meanwhile, the SNP's leader made an effective point with questions about UK immigration policy.
Can I ask the Prime Minister to outline the safe and legal route available to a child refugee seeking to flee Sudan and come to the United Kingdom? Now that he has confirmed that there is no safe and legal route, will he therefore confirm that it would be his government's intention to detain and deport a child refugee who flees Sudan and comes to the United Kingdom?
This country has a proud record of compassionately supporting those who need our assistance.
Elsewhere, the PM gave a clear answer on paying reparations for the UK's role in slavery.
Offer a full and meaningful apology for our country's role in slavery and colonialism and commit to reparatory justice.
No, Mr. Speaker.
When asked by an SNP MP about Dominic Raab and bullying, Mr Sunak nodded towards the ongoing police investigation into SNP finances.
It is somewhat odd to be getting lectures on values right now from the SNP.
And the Speaker got a little confused, introducing Keir Starmer as if he was running the country.
So just be aware that somebody will be going for that cup of tea today, Prime Minister.
Perhaps, if opinion polls prove accurate, a sign of things to come.
Well, we've been discussing this evening the government's controversial new migration legislation designed to try and ensure those crossing the Channel in small boats are swiftly removed to a third country like Rwanda. Well, that passed the Commons today. There was, of course, lots of opposition from Labour and others, but also some concerns from some on the Conservative benches as well. Now, we can talk to our next guest, who won some concessions from the government over unaccompanied children. Tim Loughton joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us. So how did you vote today?
I voted for the bill. This bill needs to go through because we have got to do something practical to stop this completely unsustainable and dangerous business of small boats coming across the Channel in a disorderly way. And it's tough. There are really tough measures in the bill to clamp down on bogus asylum seekers and on the people smugglers who are benefiting from this tragic trade. And I wanted to balance that with making sure that there are clearly defined safe and legal routes, which was an amendment that I put down with a lot of colleagues, which the government has accepted. So there will be clearly set out safe and legal routes for genuine asylum seekers to be able to come to the UK, particularly if they have a close connection, without having to go in the small boats.
I just want to unpick this a bit for people who might not be familiar with the phrase safe and legal routes, because the situation as it stands is that for many countries, including places like Sudan, for example, that's been in the news, there aren't any ways for people to legally claim asylum in the UK, right?
There are, but they're really difficult. So if you come from Hong Kong or Ukraine, there have been the resettlement schemes, and we've taken over 300,000 people from those two areas, and we'll take a lot more, particularly from Hong Kong. If you're part of the Syria scheme, we took on 25,000 Syrians and gave them safe passage and brought to the UK. And then there's the Afghanistan scheme as well. The trouble is with the Afghanistan scheme, where we airlifted, I think at the time, about 15,000 people legally from Kabul airport in a hurry, something like 9,000 of them, 18 months later, are still in hotels. So it shows the problem about how we not just bring them to the UK safely, but then can give them full-time, permanent accommodation. So it's not easy. So there are routes through family reunion and through the UNHCR, the refugee agency, but they're really difficult to get on. So what we want is to make sure we have got proper safe and legal routes, widely advertised, much more accessible, and these will be additional to what we've got now. And that's what the government has agreed. So the example that I challenged the Home Secretary with notoriously some months ago, what if I'm a 16-year-old orphan from an East African country with a relative legally in the UK? How would I get to the UK safely and legally, which she slightly struggled to answer. That hypothetical situation became a reality this week with Sudan. That 16-year-old is actually happening now. So we need to make sure that we can pass that 16-year-old Sudanese test for somebody who clearly is an asylum seeker, clearly escaping danger, has a connection with the UK if they've got a relative here, so has a case to apply for asylum to the UK. That's the sort of person we need, and I think most people would agree that we have a duty to.
Because right now the 16-year-old from Sudan can't get here. Right?
If they had a relative that can go through quite an elaborate process, they might stand a chance. If they made it to a UNHCR refugee camp or something like that, then they might be able to. What we need to do, as we've done in the past, we've done it very successfully in the past, is expand family reunion schemes and say to the UNHCR, we are prepared to take on, from Sudan or whatever, X number of genuine refugees. Please go and identify for them and we'll arrange for them to come over here. And that's the sort of thing we're going to get in the future now.
Now, I'll level with you. When I kind of interview ministers, they say, yes, we're going to open more safe and legal routes. Yeah, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Not right now. We can't say what they are. We can't say how we're going to do it, but it's going to happen. Do you actually believe them?
Yes, it's got to happen. So what the amendment that I got through today says, ideally what I wanted it to do is that when this bill goes into law and all the tough measures come in, the safe and legal routes are ready to kick into action. I didn't get that because there's a lot of work still to be done. But what the amendment does guarantee is that within 6 months of the bill going through, the government will have had to properly consult with local authorities and others to see what we can take and how we're going to accommodate them. It's not a case of bringing them here, but how are we going to look after those people and what those safe and legal routes are going to look like, how people will be able to access them and get to the UK. And they will start next year. Now, that's a bit of a gap, but actually it's a clear undertaking that will now be on the face of the bill and the government will be beholden to, and we'll make sure that happens.
You'll make sure it happens. How are you going to do that? You're going to be on their case?
Well, if they don't produce those details when the bill goes to the House of Lords, this bill is going to get a tough time in the House of Lords. It's a controversial bill. It's necessarily tough. There are going to be many more changes to it before it becomes law. But if people want safe and legal routes, this bill now offers it. So there's got to be a compromise in the Lords. We want more detail from the government as to what they're going to look like in order to get it through the Lords so these safe and legal routes can start. So I'm confident. We're trusting ministers to produce it. They've said there's going to be an annual vote in Parliament as to how many refugees we can sustainably take on. We want to do this, but we want to make sure we're taking on the right people, genuine refugees escaping persecution, civil war, Sudan, who have a connection with the UK, and that's what this does.
Andrew Mitchell earlier said that the government is testing the limits, in his words, of international law. I mean, some would say that they're breaking it.
Well, OK, so there's an issue about the European Convention and this problem when we try and deport people, then at the last minute there is an interim injunction produced under the ECHR by an anonymous European judge, and that's happened so many times, and that grounded the Rwanda flights, which haven't started yet. Those Section 39 injunctions, they used to be called temporary injunctions, are not actually part of the European Convention. They are an internal process of the European Convention system. Everybody raves about the ECHR. Over the last 10 years, there are more than 400 Convention rulings that have not been complied with. We are one of the best compliers with Convention rulings. There's, I think, only 9 outstanding rulings we haven't complied with, which includes things like giving votes to prisoners, which in Parliament we voted against because I and most people don't actually believe in. In Spain, I think the figure is something like 61% of those Convention rulings have not been complied with. In Italy, it's 58%. France and Germany is very high.
But you can't pick and choose, can you? That's not how law works, is it?
No, but what I'm saying is we have only not complied with a very small number. Lots of other European countries have not complied with a very large number, but we're the ones who are in the frame. And the Convention knows they've got to change their methods as well.
We are out of time. Always interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much for being on the programme. You're watching The Take live in Westminster. Up next, we're going to be taking a look at the gambling white paper that is out tomorrow and expected to propose tightening regulations.
A lot of action going on. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Our street! Our street!
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything you know, his memories is all gone.
In almost every corner, this town has been completely destroyed by the fire. I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
Well, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
I report on the biggest stories from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians. You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha?
Destroyed my nation.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet. Yeah, I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. A very violent series of confrontations here. What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here knows the truth of ISIS.
Hello, welcome back live to Westminster. You are watching The Take. Now, a government white paper on changes to the regulation of the gambling industry is due out tomorrow. But there are some real and serious concerns from campaigners about the closeness of the relationship between MPs and the gambling industry. Our political correspondent Liz Bates has been taking a look.
It was first promised in December 2020 by the then Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden. A year later, his replacement, Nadine Dorries, said the gambling white paper was coming, but she was reshuffled and it was delayed. Last April, we were told it was a matter of weeks, but then Boris Johnson's premiership collapsed and it was delayed again. Now, after 2.5 years, 5 delays, 3 prime ministers, 4 culture secretaries, 6 gambling ministers, finally, the white paper will be published tomorrow by the latest Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser. In that time, the gambling industry has been busy, pouring cash into politics, and Sky News' Westminster Accounts tool allows us to show you just how much. Gambling, gaming and racing companies have splashed out over £200,000 on donations to MPs this Parliament, almost all of that in the form of tickets to big sporting events and hospitality. The top source lobbying firm, the Betting and Gaming Council, who've gifted over 90 grand in freebies to more than 40 MPs. Its CEO is Michael Duggar, former Labour minister who is well connected in Westminster. The MP who's made the most is Conservative Lawrence Robertson, who has had £33,500 in hospitality, on top of almost £60,000 for being an advisor. It could be a lot more, though, as any gift less than £300 doesn't have to be declared. And Tory MP Scott Benton, who was secretly filmed by the Times newspaper, seemed to suggest the system is open to abuse. He said, without saying too much, you'd be amazed at the number of times I've been to the races and the ticket comes to £295. Tomorrow, we'll find out whether all this has paid off. We expect a new mandatory levy on industry profits and state limits on slot machines, and new rules to slow down online casino games. More controversial measures, though, could go to consultation, and the government, after all this, could still run out of time.
Lots of scrutiny there on the gambling industry, as Liz Bates was saying. And remember, of course, you can use our own Westminster Accounts tool to find out exactly how much MPs have been getting paid or getting donations for as well through industries like the gambling industry. So definitely worth checking out. Well, it's been a busy day in Westminster, to say the least. At the minute, it feels like everything is slightly heightened here, to be honest, ahead of those all-important local elections. Both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer know that it's going to be seen as a test of their leadership. Who is going to come out top? It's a game of expectation management, as always, with these things, but also geographical too. Only in England, the election's taking place, but of course, that's where some of the decisive seats could be held to. Well, that's it for The Take. We'll be back next week and every week, 9 p.m. Wednesday nights. Next up, it is Sky News at 10. Thanks a lot for watching.